Yeah, welcome back to the show, everybody. I am Craig Pasta Jardula, and this is LOL, the segment where the left laughs out loud at itself to keep itself from crying because there's so much craziness going on with the synthetic left. I am your host, the captain, Craig Pasta Jardula, and let me bring in my co-host, the professor himself from the University of Tulsa, Tulsa City College, Community College. He teaches over there. He's an author of many books, including his new book, Warmonger, a story about the Clintons. You got to go check it out. Ladies and gentlemen, the professor himself, Jeremy Kuzmarov, is here.
Good to be with you.
Listen, let's get into this right now. There's a lot of crazy things going on. We're going to just put this up. We're going to kind of run you through, give you a quick run about what's been going on when it comes to this Israel situation, Israel and Gaza. There is now a ground invasion going on in Israel, in Gaza, in Rafah. Jamie, if you can throw that up there, let's go. The ground invasion, antiwar.com, has reported that the ground troops are now in Rafah. And this is something that was been talked about for quite some time. They moved everybody south into Rafah. There's close to just under 2 million people, but now they are bombing Rafah. Also, Israel recently, to suppress the voices out there, the oppositional voices to the Israeli Zionist government, Israel has now ousted Al Jazeera. They threw Al Jazeera, Jamie, if we can get that next video up over here, they threw Al Jazeera out of Gaza. They banned Al Jazeera. We have a video over here we can show you. This is what's going on as far as, remember, freedom of speech, freedom of press. It's a real democracy there in Israel. Listen to this.
If you're watching this pre-recorded report, then Al Jazeera has been banned in the territory of Israel. On April the 1st, the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, passed a law that allowed the prime minister to ban Al Jazeera. He's now enacted that law. Let me just take you through some of the definitions within the law. They've banned our website, including anything that has the option of entering or accessing the website, even passwords that are needed, whether they're paid or not, and whether it's stored on Israeli servers or outside of Israel. The website is now inaccessible. They're also banning any device used for providing content. That includes my mobile phone. If I use that to do any kind of news gathering, then the Israelis can simply confiscate it. Our internet access provider, the guy that simply hosts AlJazeera.net, is also in danger of being fined if they host the website. The Al Jazeera TV channel, completely banned. Transmission by any kind of content provider is also banned. And holding offices or operating them in the territory of Israel by the channel.
You get an idea
also, once
of
again,
what's going on.
Any devices used to provide content.
All right, so any devices, content, no website, no hosting, no nothing. It is all banned now in Israel. No freedom of speech, no freedom of a press. In addition to that, also the student protests that have been going on have been crazy. We went out to UCLA. We had just missed it. They were putting the dump trucks up. But we have some footage over here of some of the student protests that have been going on. There's now stuff going on in USC that they're trying to quell. They're deeming these protests unlawful assemblies. Take a look and listen to some of the student protests, the craziness that we see that's going around in the country. I think it is a good thing that the students are stepping up to protest against genocide and ethnic cleansing. But here's a little clip from what we're witnessing at UCLA with the fighting of the Zionist groups too, the oppositional Zionist groups that seem to be heavily funded as well to go and take on and quell these Palestinian protests. Take a look and a listen. Videos have emerged showing violence of the pro-Israel mob on pro-Palestinian demonstrators at the anti-war camp at UCLA. One man was using a board to attack protesters and punching another.
The counter-protesters here at UCLA came with rocks and stones and batteries to throw at us. They came with wooden sticks and pepper spray to crush our spirits. Their spirits will not be crushed. They tried to take a barricade from us, and when I held on, they pulled me into a circle of them, and they started beating me on the back. They threw a rock at my eye. They threw a hammer at my leg. and they slash my arm, and then they pepper spray me in the eyes.
Police were accused of failing to act quickly enough. Witnesses said police took hours to arrive after being attacked. Campus security staff were also filmed watching the attack unfold. Universities have accused Gaza protesters of creating a threatening atmosphere. And finally, but in Los Angeles, it was the anti-war protesters who faced the violent attack. Jamie, you can stop that right now. That's enough there. That was from Al Jazeera. There's a reason why they're getting banned left and right, and they're not being able to go and broadcast what's going on because it seems like the cops and the security are standing down and allowing this to happen. Jeremy, your thoughts really quickly, because I want to play one last point I want to point out, because there's been talk of a ceasefire, and it looks like Hamas has accepted those terms of a ceasefire, but the State Department and the Israelis seem to be spinning in a different way. But do you have any comments on what we just talked about right now? All this craziness between the ground invasion, between Al Jazeera getting banned, from the protesters getting beaten down. Your thoughts, Professor, on what we're seeing and how it relates to some of the anti-war protests we saw back during the Vietnam War.
Well, we're seeing something really ugly going on. We're seeing that the Israeli government has committed horrific atrocities. It's awakened the whole world to what's going on. They've alienated much of the world. These protesters, are speaking out, and they're getting viciously attacked and beaten. And it was a disgrace that the LAPD didn't defend them. The LAPD was present there, and they just stood by for hours as these attacks went on. People were getting beaten physically. One guy had staples put in his back. A lot had to be taken to the hospital. These were peaceful protesters expressing their constitutional right to free speech on public land, and the university didn't defend them either. And they were the ones arrested. These vigilantes who came in were not students, and none of them were arrested. And these are just vicious thugs. None were arrested, but the 200 student protesters who were peacefully protesting. And I talked to students who were in the protests when we were there, and they said they were mentioning things like teach-in events that they were having. And they said that there are no courses on the UCLA campus for all the money. It's a beautiful campus and there's plenty of wealth there, but they're not, this is a growing authoritarian climate in the country, and it's affected university. They're not even providing any critical analysis for students on the Israel-Palestine conflict. And that's why they said they set up these teach-in, that we're taking our education into our own hands. And they also talked about setting up acupuncture booths, just the stress of these students who are trying to study for their midterm. They're expressing themselves, and they have a right to, and they have a conscience. They're really treated horribly by the university, and the police were not there to protect them. That's bad.
And you know what, Jeremy, Professor, excuse me, I'm sorry. We're in class now, and I didn't refer to you by your proper name, but we had talked about how they could be more effective, right? We had some constructive criticism for some of the protesters, the way they're not kind of, engaging with anybody. They want to get all the comments and everybody talked, all the points only be talked to the press or the agitators by individuals, certain individuals. They're trying to control the information that goes out there. And that is important in a way, because we understand that, they'll start getting some of these protesters who are really not speaking for the demands and whatnot, and they'll start yabbing off, and the conservative media or the agitating media oppositional media will take a little clip and take that clip and put it out there and really kind of put a stain on the message. However, it's really important in these protests to get those message out, Professor. So we had talked about ways where maybe they can hang, and I'm going to say this again. I'm going to continue to say this because it's great there. If you had a picture of a child who was bombed in Gaza, and you had different children that were bombed, because that information is out there, right? And you had a protester, if there's somebody engages with them and they say, well, why are you here? They can say they're here for this person, and this person was killed. Well, what do you think about Hamas? Well, I'm not really going to talk about that, but I'm going to talk about this child right here that was bombed. Regardless of Hamas, does this child deserve to be civilian, deserve to be bombed? They got to find a way to get their message out more effectively. And And I think that's a constructive criticism that they need to take into account moving forward. Wouldn't you agree, Professor? You mentioned pamphlet because these protests really about getting that message for moving forward, correct?
Yeah, I would agree with you. I mean, I think tactically they can certainly improve. Media relations is very important. They were refusing to talk to media, most of them, and I was there, and I said I'm sympathetic media. I mean, I was with other media like Wall Street Journal who may not be sympathetic, but even to them, they should just try and get their message out. Yeah, this is an opportunity and one of the people I spoke to said this, activism and protest is an opportunity to raise public consciousness, raise awareness, raise education, raise debate. And now they are having teach-ins or were within the encampment. These should try and spread within the community. They should host them on the campus. They should invite people of different perspectives. They should provide a lot of historical background because that's important in this conflict. Hamas didn't come out of nowhere. There was a radicalization over years of a brutal Israeli occupation that I think they want to point out. So outreach to the community, education, media relations, they could do a lot better. And they should also link the conflict in Middle East and U.S. the nefarious role the U.S. is playing in escalating that conflict to the nefarious role that the United States is playing in escalating conflicts around the world, including with regards to Ukraine and Russia and China, and to an overall imperialistic foreign policy that people of this young generation should fight to overturn.
Let's play this last clip because I think it's really important. Jeremy, Professor, before we get into the people who warned us back in the days, the old school history of Zionism, and I think there were a lot more voices willing, especially Jewish voices were willing to speak out against what the Zionist state is doing. I don't want to take away from all those Jewish people who've been showing up, saying not in my name. That is some great stuff they've been doing. But we also have some people that are a little bit more, they were deeply rooted into Israel society that kind of talked about it. But we've been screaming about a ceasefire, ceasefire, ceasefire. One of the demands from the protesters have been an immediate ceasefire and ending the occupation. It looks like there was a ceasefire on the table, but it wasn't Hamas who wasn't willing to take it. It was Israel who wasn't willing to take it. This is a clip from George Galloway and Richard Medhurst talking on the mother of all talk shows about the whole duck and cover, or the what's the analogy I'm looking at, bait and switch that the Israeli government is playing, because they really don't want a ceasefire. At least I don't think. Here it is.
Hostages, the Palestinian hostages, they've been sitting in Israeli dungeons for many years, and the Israelis, they pretend like they want to have an exchange, but they just keep on refusing the offer that was there on the table since day one. Since day one, it's been the same offer: get out of Gaza, allow people to go back to their homes, and give us everyone that you've put in dungeons. Remember, these are women, these are children, these are men who are locked up without charge, without trial. And I should remind people who are listening that these are British laws that are used to lock them up. I don't mean copies. I mean actual British laws, colonial laws from the emergency defense regulations. The Israelis apply them on our behalf. How nice. And so there's no ceasefire in sight. And they're playing cat and mouse with Hamas. This is something we really have to be clear on this. Ben Gvir is not interested in a ceasefire. He just wants to kill everyone. Netanyahu is not interested in a ceasefire because he wants to keep his job. The second that there's a ceasefire, it's bye-bye for him. He's going to be, all the blame will be dumped on him, and Israelis will try to salvage what they can of their supposed reputation, if there is one in the first place. And so they say, it's all Netanyahu. We didn't do anything. There's no racism in Israeli society. We don't commit genocide and kill people like this, as if we don't know about 1948. And then they'll say it's Netanyahu. Okay, we'll get rid of Netanyahu. Now take us back. So no, there's no ceasefire in sight.
So, Professor, your thoughts on that? When we start talking about a ceasefire, do the Israelis even really want a ceasefire at the end of the day? I mean, the State Department acts like it's Hamas that's not taking the ceasefire, right? Here people like Sullivan and Kirby. But what are your thoughts on the ceasefire? Do you think they even want a ceasefire?
I don't think so. They have a broader goal of ethnic cleansing and forging a greater Israel. They have ideas about how they can use that land that they take over. They've been moving settlers in there. They want to build a canal, improve Israel's water resources. There's oil offshore. That's their main interest. And the people who run the Israeli government, like Ben Gvir, are of the extreme wing of the Zionist movement, that they have no regard for Palestinian life. So they have no regard for these human rights abuses. Doesn't bother them. They refer to Israelis as Gazans as human animals, so they want to, destroy them.
You released an article last April. It says Jewish prophets who predicted a nightmarish escalation of Israeli-Palestine conflict were blacklisted and ignored. Why don't we get into that a little bit? Because we want to talk about those who did call it out. I mean, so many times, right, we see, in the media, in the independent media, there were so many of us who were talking about, COVID issues before they happened, election issues before they happened. And we were, blacklisted, censored, demonetized. There's a group of Israeli people, right? I should say, Jewish prophets, you refer to them, who predicted that this escalation would get so far out of hand that everything we just talked about right now, they could have already seen it coming. Give us your thoughts on some of these people and how we should remember them or look at their work.
Yeah, and Martin Buber was a very famous, brilliant philosopher, and he said Ahad Am was a true Zion. I mean, if they were around today, that these people in power, Ben Gvir, Netanyahu, they would say that they're not real Zionists. They betrayed the Zionist cause and the Jewish people through their brutal conduct. That the real Zionists were figure like Ahad Am, who was part of the original Zionist Congress. I mean, the Jews were an oppressed people in Europe. They suffered pogroms and then the Nazi Holocaust. So there was a real impetus behind the Zionist movement. But Ahad Am warned, in the original Zionist Congress, he was a Jewish writer, originally born in Ukraine, known as Asher Ginsburg, but he tried to revitalize the Hebrew language because Jews spoke Yiddish in Europe. And he was trying to revive the Hebrew language, and he supported the Zionist project, but only if there was respect toward the Palestinian population and that there was cohabitation and peaceful coexistence. And Martin Buber said he was a true Zionist, and that Zionists should be based on ethical foundations, and that there should be cooperation and coexistence with the locals. And then Ahad Am, when he migrated to Israel, he wrote an article, Truth from the Land of Israel, where he lamented that the Jewish settlers were treating the Palestinians in a cruel way. Even then, this is in the early 1900s, and he wrote a lot about his vision for Zionism rooted in ethics and rooted in coexistence with the Palestinians. And that was a liberal humanist strain of the Zionist movement. There were many other luminaries who adopted this position, including people like Albert Einstein. And Hannah Arendt was a brilliant Jewish philosopher. And she said that it was Israel should never rely for protection on an outside imperialistic power. That would be the end of the nation. And that's exactly what Noam Chomsky, who's also a prophet, and Chomsky was attached to the Zionist project through his family. And a lot of the original Zionists were socialists who set up kibbutz system on the cooperative model of living, where they shared their resources. And Chomsky was attracted to that as a leftist, and he lived on a kibbutz, and he liked the spirit, but he saw that there was a lot of racism toward the Arabs and mistreatment. And this was in like the 40s, early 50s. And then he wrote a great book called The Fateful Triangle about kind of taking Arendt's warning further, that the fatal mistake of the Zionist movement was to rely on the British and then the United States empire for their protection, and to take all these weapons. And it ultimately made them into imperialist aggressors like we see now, attacking other countries, brutally mistreating the Palestinians. And if one day America loses its interest in Israel, because right now the United States uses Israel for its own purpose. The U.S. hosts military bases in Israel. The U.S. uses Israel to do a lot of its dirty work in the region, like getting rid of Nasser in the 60s and now targeting Iran. If Israel loses its strategic utility for the United States and they pull the rug, Israel's doomed, because they've created so many enemies through their hostile and violent conduct. that's going to be the end of the Zionist project, and Jewish people will suffer another genocide. And that's what Chomsky warned about in Iran, and back to Ahad Ha'am. For the Zionist project to be successful, Jews had to be respectful toward the Arabs and coexist with them. Instead, they've done the opposite. These imposters and violent thugs took over that movement, and now Israel's a pariah state, and they brought a bad name to Jewish people around the world, and that's a tragedy. And that's why you have so many Jews at these encampments, because that does not represent their values. And there are a lot of Jews who continue to promote this humanist vision that may yet one day prevail. We can hope.
So let me ask you a question, because I know a lot of people will say there that even still that particular, there was a movement of, Jewish people who want to recognize the 1967 borders. They want to be able to still have that land, but they still want to live peacefully and find a way to live peacefully with the Palestinians that are still left in that region, as far as Gaza and the West Bank and whatnot. Isn't that still, in your mind, Professor, a negative kind of position to be in as Palestinians, being the fact that in 1948 there was a Nakba, they were removed, that they shouldn't have to have it, and they shouldn't have to digress to this position where it's like, okay, we'll accept the borders of the 1967, which, by the way, they're not even being paid attention to now. They're not being respected whatsoever. There's still a blockade on Gaza. So the Israelis are not even kind of honoring the latest or the last written agreement for that region right now. But isn't there some argument that that's still even still that particular position is not fair to the Palestinians?
Yeah, and Ahad Ha'am and Chomsky both, and I think many others, featured in this book by Daphne Levitt. It's called Jewish Voice of Dissent. They favored a binational state that would be Israelis and Palestinians, and they never favored occupation by the Israelis, a Jewish exclusivist state occupying Palestinian land. And that's what occurred after the 6-Day War. The Israelis, defeated the Egyptian army in 6 days, and as a booty of the war, got Gaza and the West Bank, and have ruled it since as an occupying power. The Oslo Agreement was an attempt basically to transfer more control to the Palestinians, but that process was sabotaged by the Likud government of Ariel Sharon and Benjamin Netanyahu. And we're in a situation today where Israel is expanding their settlements and basically just trying to forge a greater Israel and take over all that land and push the Palestinians out in a very cruel way. And the humanists featured in Levitt's book they all oppose the occupation that followed the 67 war, those who are still alive. And certainly they would be in opposition today. And they would say that Netanyahu is not a true Zionist. He betrayed the Zionist cause and really a traitor and a war criminal who should be indicted in The Hague.
So closing out the show, because we've got a little bit over a minute left, do you see any kind of parallels to those Jewish boys that were dissented upon? In other words, they didn't have to, they didn't get their message out. They were, demonetized. They were suffocated, their voices. Do you see that any parallel to what we're seeing with Al Jazeera being thrown out of Israel today?
Well, yeah, and Israel has muzzled journalists. Israel, there's a guy named Israel Levy whose story was featured in Consortium News, that he was trying to report the truth of Israeli military conduct, after October 7th, when this war started. And I don't know if he was jailed. He was certainly fired, and he had no platform, and he may be jailed. And I think there are some Israelis trying to tell the truth, but it's very difficult. And now, foreign media are being banned, and showed the authoritarian nature of this Israeli government. And that's exactly at odds with what Martin Buber said. He said that Israel should be an ethical entity and a true democracy, and it's evolved into an authoritarian, warlike country.
That's it for today, guys. That's a shame, Professor. Great closing words. I am the Captain Craig Pasta Jardula, the Professor, Jeremy Kuzmarov. We'll see you soon.